Commander Larasa Moonwhisper stood in the war chamber with her dragon. Emberwing beside her, the elven generals watched her with respect because she had never lost a battle in 300 years. Her violet eyes were calm but alert as she looked. At the message crystal in her hand, a human ship had entered their space without permission. The Terran Federation was very young in space travel, and the elves thought humans were weak and simple. The audacity of sending one ship made some of the generals laugh. Captain Kellen handed her the data crystal and said the humans called it a formal war declaration. They claimed the elves had broken the peace treaty by attacking their colon. Emberwing growled low and deep. The dragon was 4,000 years old, and her copper scales shimmered in the chamber light. She could feel through their mental bond that Larasa was curious, but also felt the humans were foolishly. Rasasa activated the crystal, and a hologram appeared, showing a human woman. In a military uniform, the woman had brown hair, tied back, and green eyes that showed no fear at all. She wore the rank of admiral. Human woman spoke clearly and said her name was Admiral Kate Morrison of the Terran Federation. She said the elves had attacked Colony 7 and broken galactic law. The humans wanted the elves to leave human space and pay for damages within 72 hours or face Wartha. Council chamber filled with loud laughter. The idea that humans could threaten the mighty Ethelian Empire seemed like a joke to everyone, but Larasa did not laugh. She studied the admiral's face carefully. Looking for fear or doubt, she found none. The human was completely serious and showed only cold determination. Lee's commanded her communications officer to send a reply telling the humans that the Empire did not negotiate with children playing at Juarez. The message left the station. Emberwing shifted her massive body uneasily. The dragon had learned over 4,000 years to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. 3 days passed and the deadline came and went. The humans did not send angry messages or threats. Instead, they sent nothing at all. The silence was complete and absolute then, without any warning. 17 elven patrol fleets vanished from space near the human border. There were no distress signals and no debris fields. The fleets simply disappeared as if they had never existed. Laressa stood on the bridge of her flagship called Starfire. Destinian stared at the empty space where Fleet Commander Thorin should have been. Emberwing pressed her large head against Larasa's side, and her wings twitched with nervous energy. Larasa ordered her crew to find out what happened immediately. But she already felt the cold truth in her heart. The humans had not been making empty threats. They had been making a promise of war. Her sensor officer reported that they were scanning the area, but finding nothing at all. It was as if the fleets had been erased from Existentialis. Walked to the tactical display and studied the patterns. The missing fleets were all on the border of human space, and all had vanished within hours of each other. This was not random, and it was not an accidentum. Bang spoken to her mind through their bond, asking if the humans could really have done this. Larasa responded that she did not know, but they would find out soon. The ship's alarm suddenly blared, and red lights flashed across the bridge. Her tactical officer shouted that unknown ships were appearing on sensors. All around them, Larasa gripped the command rail and demanded a full report. Her crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to understand what was happening. The view screen showed dozens of black human ships materializing from empty space as if they had been invisible. They were already in firing positions surrounding the Starfire Destiny completely. These were not the primitive vessels their intelligence reports had described. These ships were sleek and dangerous looking, with angular designs and what appeared to be some kind of light-bending technologilarious. Ordered all weapons ready and told Emberwing to launch with her dragon squadron. The dragon roared and leaped through the hangar bay shield into open space. 24 other dragons followed with their riders. The dragons were magnificent creatures, breathing fire and flying through space using ancient magic. The riders guided them toward the human fleet, with centuries of combat training, but the humans were completely prepared. Their point defense systems activated and filled space with thousands of high-speed projectiles. 3 dragons fell in the first attack, their riders screaming as the mental bonds broke. Emberwing dodged a missile barrage and unleashed her dragon fire at the nearest human ship. The flames washed over the vessel but did nothing. The humans had shields that stopped energy weapons. completely a young elf rider named Kaelin, shouted through the communications that energy weapons were useless and they needed to fall back immediately before Emberwing could retreat, a tiny rune. Human fighters streaked past, moving impossibly fast. A single shot from its weapon punched through. Emberwing's Wing the dragon shrieked in pain and fury and began spinning toward the flagship emergency hangar. Larasa felt every bit of her companion's agony. Through their mental connection, Larasa's ordered all dragons to return to the ship and redirected all power to shields and weapons. She targeted the human-led vessel with their most powerful cannon. The ancient elven weapon charged and fired with the power of a dying star.
Ow.
The beam crossed space and struck the human flagship directly for. A moment Larasa thought they had won. But as the light faded, the human ship remained floating there. Its shields flickered, but held strong. A transmission came through, showing Admiral Kate Morrison standing calmly on her bridge with arms crossed. In a slight smile, Morrison spoke and said Commander Moonwhisper had 71 hours remaining to withdraw from human space, or there would be no elven fleet left to withdraw. The transmission ended abruptly. Larasa stared at the blank screen, feeling something she had not experienced in 300 years of warfare. She felt genuine fear. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the rail. Emberwing limped into the bridge, her wing damaged and bleeding. The dragon's eyes met hers, and through their bond, they shared the same terrible realization. They had greatly underestimated the humans, and that mistake might cost them everything. 2 weeks had passed since the war began, and the Ethylene Empire still did not understand what they were fighting against. Larasa walked back and forth in the war room while Emberwing watched from her resting place. The dragon's tail moved with agitation as she healed from her wing injury. 43 fleets had vanished into nothing, not destroyed but simply gone. The few survivors who escaped told strange stories about shadows and ships that appeared from nowhere. These mystery ships struck with terrible accuracy and disappeared before anyone could fight back. General Solarith Dawnblade slammed his fist on the tactical table and declared it was impossible. He said human technology was primitive, with basic fusion engines and simple weapons. Nothing their intelligence showed could explain these attacks. Larasa cut him off coldly and said their intelligence was clearly wrong. She turned to ask her communications officer if there was any word from diplomatic channels. The officer reported that there was nothing at all. The humans had gone completely silent, with no demands and no negotiations. They were not even responding to civilian messages. That silence disturbed Larasa more than anything else in 3 centuries of war. Every enemy had wanted something like territory or resources or surrender, but the humans asked for nothing. They only struck and vanished like angry ghosts seeking Revan. Emberwing made a low warning sound, and Larasa felt danger approaching. Through their mental bond, Larasa called out asking for a sensor report. Her sensor officer said everything was clear on long range, with no contacts anywhere in the system. Ship suddenly rocked hard to one side, throwing people against walls. Emergency. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel. Larasa shouted for a report while gripping the command rail to stay standing. Emberwing launched into the air, her massive wings barely fitting inside the chamber. The tactical officer stammered that multiple contacts had appeared inside their defensive perimeter. He could not understand how they got so close without being detected. The main view screen, filled with weapons, fired dozens of sleek black human warships had materialized from what looked like empty space. Their weapons were already shooting at the elven fleet. These ships were predators with sharp angles and deadly purpose. They were covered in adaptive camouflage that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible. Larasa commanded her crew to launch all fighters and get Emberwing's dragon squadron into space. Immediate. Tellenburn roared and dove through the hangar bay energy shield, followed by 24 other bonded dragons. The massive creatures flew into space with their riders guiding them using centuries of experience. Humans were completely ready for them. Point defense turrets came alive, filling the void with streams of super-fast bullets. 3 more dragons fell in the first pass, and their riders screamed. As the mental bonds were severed, forever, Emberwing rolled her body, dodging a barrage of missiles that would have killed her instantly. She unleashed dragon fire at the nearest human ship. The flames washed over the enemy vessel's protective shields and did absolutely nothing. Kaelin shouted through the communication system. that the ships were shielded against all energy weapons and ordered everyone to fall back before Emberwing could retreat. A human fighter craft streaked past. It was tiny compared to dragons, but moved impossibly fast. A precisely aimed railgun shot punched through her wing member. Nim shrieked in pain and fury as she spiraled toward the flagship emergency hangar. Through their bond, Larasa felt every ounce of her dragon companion's agony, and Larasa ordered all dragons to return to the flagship and redirected all power to shields and main weapons. She told her weapons officer to target the enemy-led vessel, the Starfire Destiny's main cannon, began charging with ancient elven technology that had destroyed moons and boiled entire oceans. The weapon fired with the fury of a collapsing star. The energy beam shot across space and struck the human flagship with full power. For one moment, Larasa believed they had succeeded in destroying it, but as the blinding light faded, the human ship was still there. Shields flickered and wavered, but they held. A transmission suddenly came through, showing Admiral Kate Morrison standing on her bridge. With arms crossed, she wore a slight smile on her face. Morrison spoke calmly, saying, "Commander Moonwhisper, it's 71 hours left to withdraw from human space." She said if they did not leave, there would be no Ethelian fleet remaining. The transmission ended. Larasa stared at the dark screen, feeling cold fear run through her body. Emberwing limped onto the bridge with medical teams working on her damaged wing, though. Dragon's bright, intelligent eyes were now dim with pain and something worse, which was doubt. Larasa pressed her forehead against Emberwing's scaled face and whispered that they had badly underestimated their enemy. Through their mental bond, emotions flowed between them, including confusion and anger and a creeping uncertainty that neither wanted to admit. A voice interrupted them, and Larasa turned to see Lieutenant Maya Collins. Maya was a human liaison officer and one of the few Terrans who had stayed in Elven space after diplomatic relations began. The young woman's face was pale and conflicted. Maya said she had been told to give Larasa something if war started. She held out a data tablet and explained it was from Admiral Morisono. Larasa took the device and activated it. A file appeared with the title Project Enduring Flame and Human Military Doctrine Analysis. She began reading, and with each line her blood felt colder in her veins. Humans had not been unprepared at all. They had been planning this for 50 years. Since first contact, they had been carefully watching the Ethelian Empire. They studied every battle and every tactic and every single weakness. They saw how elven fleets relied on energy weapons and dragon squadrons, so they built kinetic railguns and point defense systems designed specifically to counter them. But there was more than just technology. The humans had learned about elven honor and culture. They understood that elves expected warfare to be conducted openly with formal challenges and honorable combat, so the humans had thrown away that entire approach. Maya explained quietly that humans called it asymmetric warfare. She said they did not fight fair, but instead fought only to win. Larasa asked slowly if the attack on Colony 7 had been an accident. Maya shook her head and explained the colony was built in a disputed zone. The Empire knew it was a provocation. Admiral Morrison needed a legitimate reason for war that would unite the Federation. Illyrius asked what came next before Maya could answer. The alarms went off again. Larasa ran to the bridge with Emberwing limping behind despite her injuries. Her sensor officer's face turned white as he reported massive energy signatures appearing throughout the entire sector. It was the full Terran Federation fleet with hundreds of ships. They had been hiding in asteroid fields and inside gas giant atmospheres anywhere the elven sensors could not detect them. The view screen showed the terrible truth. A massive swarm of human vessels was emerging from concealment. They surrounded not just the Starfire Destiny, but every single Ethelian position in the Regine. Transmission crackled through the speakers. Admiral Morrison's voice told all elven forces they were surrounded and outgunned. She said, "Surrender now, and be treated fairly, or refuse and see why they should have withdrawn when given the chance." General Floreth drew his energy weapon and declared that they were Ethelian and would never surrender. Larasa interrupted him with an icy voice and told him to look at the tactical display. He looked, and his face fell in horror and despair. The humans had positioned their fleet with perfect mathematical precision. Every possible escape route was completely blocked. Every defensive position was flanked from multiple sides. The elves had been herded here like animals to be slaughtered. Saloth whispered, asking how long the humans had been planning this. Larasa Thought back to that first message in Admiral Morrison's cold, determined eyes. She answered since the exact moment they fired on that Colin Yemberwing growled deep in her throat and through their bond. Larasa felt the dragon's question about whether they should fight. She looked at her crew and at the wounded dragons in the hangar and at the thousands of lives under her command. Then she looked at the human fleet, patient and ready, like a predatory Rasa. Decided they would fight, but not to win, only to survive long enough to find another way. Larasa found Emberwing. In the medical bay, where healers worked carefully on her magnificent damaged wing, the dragon's eyes, which were usually bright with fierce intelligence, were now dimmed with pain and something even worse, Alara suppressed. Her forehead gently against Emberwing's scaled snout and whispered that they had badly underestimated the humans through their deep mental bond. Emotions flowed freely between them, including confusion and anger and a creeping uncertainty that neither of them wanted to face. Say voice interrupted the quiet moment. Larasa turned to see Lieutenant Maya Collins standing nearby. The young human woman's face was very pale and showed signs of inner conflict. Maya said she assumed Larasa now understood what they were really fighting against. Larasa asked her to explain everything she knew. Maya pulled out a datapad and began showing files. She explained that humans had been preparing for this exact war for 50 years. They had watched every elven battle and studied every tactic. They saw the Empire's reliance on energy weapons and dragon squadrons, so the humans built kinetic weapons and point defense grids, specifically designed to counter those exact advantages. Maya continued, explaining that humans had also studied elven culture very carefully. They learned about honor codes and the expectation of formal open warfare. The humans decided to completely ignore those rules. Larasa asked about the attack on Colony 7 and whether it was really an accident. Maya slowly shook her head and explained the colony was established in a zone both sides claimed. The Empire knew it was a provocation. Admiral Morrison needed a legitimate cause for war that would unite all of humanity. Larasa felt sick, realizing they had walked straight into a carefully prepared trap. Maya said humans called it asymmetric warfare, which meant fighting without any concern for fairness or honor, only fighting to win at any cost. Before Larasa could respond, the ship's alarms began shrieking again. She immediately ran toward the bridge with Emberwing limping along behind her despite the pain from her injuries. Her sensor officer reported with a white face that massive energy signatures were appearing all throughout the sector. He stammered that it was the entire Terran Federation fleet with hundreds and hundreds of ships. They had been hiding everywhere. The elven sensors could not reach them inside asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres and behind planetary bodies. Main view screen displayed the horrifying truth. A gigantic swarm of human vessels emerged from concealment like predators revealing themselves. They surrounded not just the Starfire Destiny, but every single Athelian military position in the entire region of Merle. Morrison's voice came through the communication system. Addressing all elven forces, she stated calmly that they were completely surrounded and heavily outgunned. She offered one chance to surrender and be treated according to laws of war if they refused. She promised to demonstrate exactly why they should have withdrawn when first given the opportunity. General Solarith drew his energy pistol and shouted that they were Athelian warriors who never surrendered to any. Larasa cut him off sharply and commanded him to look carefully at the tactical display. He looked at the holographic map, and his proud face fell into an expression of complete despair. The humans had positioned every single ship with mathematical perfection. Every escape route was totally blocked. Every defensive position was flanked from 3 or 4 sides. Simultaneously, the elven forces had been herded into this position like livestock being led to slaughter. General Solarith whispered in shock, asking how long the humans had been planning this trap. Larasa thought back to that very first message and remembered Admiral Morrison's cold, calculating eyes. She answered that the humans had been planning since the exact moment the Empire fired on Colony 7. Emberwing growled low and deep and through their bond. Larasa felt the dragon asking whether they should fight back. Larasa looked around at her exhausted crew. She saw the wounded dragons resting. In the hangar bay, she thought of the thousands of lives depending on her command decisions. Then she studied the human fleet waiting patiently like a predator that had already won shy, made her decision, and opened a direct channel to Admiral Morrison's Image appeared on the view screen, and Larasa saw something new in those green eyes. It was Curious Atiliasa, said she requested a formal parley between Commander Morrison. Studied her carefully and said Larasa had exactly 5 minutes to convince. Her Larasa countered by asking for 36 hours. Instead, she promised to prove she could end this entire war. If she failed, the elves would surrender unconditionally with no conditions. Morrison was silent for a long moment, clearly considering. The offer she finally asked what Larasa had in Minli Rasa, took a deep breath, and explained she was going to do something. No Ethelian commander had done in 1,000 years. She was going to tell the High Council the complete truth about how they had started a war they absolutely could not win. Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. She said 36 hours, and warned that if Larasa failed or tried anything, the human fleet would attack. Immediately Arius agreed, and the transmission into Denverwing spoke into her mind, asking if she really believed the council would listen Larasa. Answered honestly that she did not know, but they had to try because the alternative was watching their entire civilization burn. She began composing the most important message of her very long life, a message that would either save the Ethelian Empire or doom it forever. High Council of Ethelian met in the Crystal Spire, which was an ancient structure, 10,000 years old. It stood at the very heart of their empire as a symbol of their power. Larasa stood before the 11 council elders, with Emberwing at her side. The dragon's presence gave her strength, even though Emberwing was still injured. High Counselor Valander, the Eternal, was the oldest among them. His eyes had witnessed the birth of stars. He regarded Larasa with those ancient eyes and asked why she had requested this emergency session. Noted that reports showed her sector was surrounded by human forces, yet she had not engaged them in battle. He demanded an explanation. Lias spoke bluntly, saying she had not engaged because doing so would be complete suicide. Council members stirred with shock at her words. Larasa continued, explaining that the humans had built a military force specifically designed to counter every single Ethelian advantage. Their energy weapons were useless against human shields. Dragons could not survive the point defense systems. The Elven tactical doctrine was completely predictable because humans had been studying them for 50 years. Counselor Marithia, who commanded Imperial Intelligence, laughed dismissively. She said that was impossible because their reports showed humans barely had interstellar. Capilotilius said coldly that those reports were completely wrong, and she had proof. She transmitted all the data Maya had given her about Project Enduring Flame. The council watched in heavy silence as the truth unfolded before them. 50 years of human preparation and intelligence gathering, a war machine built for one single purpose, which was destroying the Ethelian Empire. High Counselor Valander said slowly that the humans had known the Empire would eventually attack them. Larasa corrected him, saying the humans did not just know, they had ensured it would happen. Colony 7 was deliberate bait. They wanted this war on their terms at their chosen time, and Place Counselor Therian stood up angrily and declared they should mobilize the full might of the Empire. He shouted, about 10,000 fleets and 1,000,000 dragons. Larasa interrupted him, saying they already could not stand against what the humans currently had. Every fleet sent would play directly into human strategy. They would be isolated and destroyed one by one. The Empire would bleed itself completely dry trying to match human tactics. Umberwing rumbled in deep agreement and spoke aloud, which she rarely did, and counseled. The dragon's ancient voice filled the chamber, saying the young predator had become the elder hunter. They had not seen it happen because they were too proud to look complete. Silence fell over the council chamber. Finally, Valander asked what Larasa proposed. Dalarasa answered. With one word, negotiate, she said. Withdraw from human space and pay the reparations. Sue for peace, while they still had some leverage. Remaining Counselor Marithia asked sarcastically what leverage they possibly had when surrounded and outgunned. Larasa explained they still controlled their core territories and had their civilian population and cultural heritage intact. If they negotiated now, they could preserve the Empire itself, but if they fought to the bitter end, the humans would do what humanity always did. Two threats: they would eradicate the elves completely, and Totala. Valander observed that Larasa spoke as if she understood humans very well. Larasa said she had been carefully watching Admiral Morrison. Everything Morrison had done was in response to elven aggression. Morrison was not a conqueror, but a defender. If the Empire gave assurance of no future threats, there might be a path forward to peace. Counselor Therian stood again and said the Athelian Empire had never surrendered. In its entire history, he refused to be the generation that broke that traditionally. Ressa cut him off sharply, saying then he would be the generation that ended everything. She had seen the weapons waiting in that human fleet, things they did not have names for, ships that could strike from light years away. She paused and delivered the final devastating argument the humans had. Faster than light travel for only. The negotiation meeting took place aboard a neutral station located exactly at the border between human and Athelian space. Larasa entered the conference room with Emberwing walking proudly beside her. The dragon's wing was still bandaged, but healing well. Admiral Kate Morrison waited at the large table with her delegation captain. Lisa Harper served as her tactical officer. Commander Amy Bennett handled intelligence matters. Lieutenant Maya Collins stood nearby and gave Larasa a small, encouraging nod. Morrison greeted Larasa politely and gestured toward the empty seats across the polished table. Larasa sat down and said bluntly that they should skip pleasantries. Morrison had won the war, so she should state what she wanted. Morrison slid a datapad smoothly across the table and said the terms were listed there. She believed Larasa would find them quite reasonably. Larsa picked up the device expecting the worst possible demands. Instead, she found something completely unexpected, which was mercy. The Terran Federation demanded withdrawal from all disputed territories and full reparations for Colony 7. They wanted a demilitarized zone established between the two powers, but there were no demands for Ethelian territory itself, no requirements to completely disarm their military, no occupation forces, no tribute payments. Larasa said carefully that the terms were surprisingly generous. Morrison replied simply that humans were not conquerors. They had never wanted this war at all. They just wanted to ensure the elves could never do to humanity what they had done to other civilizations. She mentioned the Zarin Collective and the Thorn Worlds and the many other species the Empire had absorbed over millennia. Laressa felt Emberwing's shame flowing through their mental bond. The dragon remembered those wars and conquests clearly. They had seemed justified at the time as bringing civilization to lesser species, now seeing themselves from the other perspective. The truth was uncomfortably clear. They had been bullies and conquerors. Morrison continued, saying there was one additional requirement, which was a cultural exchange program. She wanted elven people and humans learning from each other's science and art and philosophy. She explained that humans had been watching the Empire for 50 years, but had only seen the military side. She wanted to know what the Athelian Empire was like when not at war. Larasa asked why Morrison would offer peace after everything the elves had done. They had attacked human territory and destroyed an entire colony. Morrison leaned forward across the table and said she had carefully studied Athelian history 300 years ago. The elves were different there. People valued art and knowledge above military conquest. Then something changed and they became an empire. And empires always needed enemies to justify their existence. Morrison paused and said she did not want humanity to become what the elves currently were, but she also did not want to destroy what the elves could potentially become against. So she was offering a choice: become partners with humanity or remain enemies. But Larasa needed to know that choosing to remain enemies meant humans would end the conflict permanently and complete. Illyrius looked deeply into Morrison's green eyes and saw not cruelty or hatred, but only iron determination. The human admiral meant every single word. Larasa said formally that on behalf of the High Council, the Athelian Empire accepted all terms and surrendered. Morrison extended her hand across the table. Larasa took it, and they shook hands in the human custom. Morrison asked what would happen now. Larasa said now they had to figure out how two very different civilizations could coexist peacefully. Morrison said she wanted to start by understanding how the bond between Larasa and Emberwing actually worked. Human psychologists were deeply fascinated by the concept of mental links between different species. Emberwing lifted her great head and studied Morrison with new interest through their bond. Larasa felt curiosity beginning to replace the dragon's earlier. Still, Talasa said slowly that might be arranged in exchange She wanted to understand how humans developed stealth technology sophisticated enough to completely fool Advance. Elven Censors Morrison smiled genuinely and said she thought they could definitely arrange that trade of knowledge over the following month. Something remarkable and unexpected happened. The war that had threatened to consume both civilizations became the foundation for an unprecedented alliance between species. Elven artisans began teaching human engineers the ancient secrets of energy manipulation techniques. Human scientists shared their advances in artificial intelligence and quantum computing systems. Dragons and their riders started training human pilots in spatial awareness techniques. These methods revolutionized human flight doctrine. Complete Illyrius and Morrison became unlikely friends, meeting regularly to discuss military strategy and philosophy and the future of the entire galaxy. Borwing even allowed Admiral Morrison to touch her copper scales. This was an incredible honor the dragon had granted to fewer than a dozen beings in her 4,000 years of life. 1 full year after the war officially ended, Larasa stood with Morrison on the observation deck of the new jointly built diplomatic station. They watched as Athelian and human ships conducted training exercises together. Morrison asked if Larasa knew what the history books would call this conflict. Larasa suggested it would be called the Human Athelian War. Morrison shook her head and said historians were calling it the Awakening. It was the moment when two advanced civilizations stopped seeing each other as threats. They started seeing each other as partners with incredible potential. Oneborn, who was resting nearby, with her wing completely healed, rumbled in deep agreement with that assessment. Laras smiled genuinely for the first time in many years. It was an expression of real hope she had not felt in centuries. She said one human war declaration had changed the galaxy forever, just not in the way anyone had expected it would. Morrison replied that the very best victories were the ones where everyone actually won something valuable. Below them in the vast space, a wing of sleek human fighters flew in perfect formation with a flight of magnificent dragons. Their movements were completely synchronized, showing unified purpose. Future remained uncertain in many ways, but for the first time in a very long time, it also seemed genuinely bright with possibility. The darkness between distant stars, other civilizations watched these events carefully and learned a simple but important truth: humanity did not fight wars to conquer territory or dominate others. They fought to be left alone in peace. But if anyone forced them into conflict, they would demonstrate exactly why they had climbed from primitive caves to conquer the stars in just a few thousand years. And then, if their enemies were wise enough to surrender with dignity, they would show something even more remarkable. They would show how to become better than what you were before. The galaxy would never be the same again. And that was actually a very good thing for everyone involved. 5 years had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. Larasa stood in the grand hall of the new Terran Athelian Academy, watching young elves and humans training together. The building itself was a masterpiece combining flowing elven architecture with human geometric precision. And Berging rested on a massive perch nearby. Her copper scales gleamed with health, and her wings showed no signs of the old injury. Young dragons played with human children in the courtyard below, something that would have been unthinkable just years ago. Admiral Kate Morrison entered the hall wearing civilian clothes now that she had retired from active military service. She walked over to Larasa with a warm smile. Morrison said the first graduating class would be the largest yet, with over 2,000 students from both civilizations. Lias replied that it was remarkable how quickly the young ones adapted. They did not carry the old prejudices and fears. The children simply saw each other as friends and fellow students. Morrison agreed and said that was exactly why they had focused so much effort on education. The future belonged to those who could see past old boundaries. Captain Lisa Harper approached them, carrying several data pads. She reported that the Joint Defense Fleet was now fully operational. 12 carriers with mixed crews of humans and elves protected the border. Territory Eslius noted that was good because recent reports showed the Krell Empire was becoming aggressive in nearby sectors. Morrison's expression became serious. She said the Krell had attacked 2 independent colonies in the past month alone. The attacks were brutal and showed no mercy for civilians. Lisa asked if Morrison thought the Krell would test their alliance. Morrison said she was certain they would. The Krell saw kindness as weakness. They would not believe that former enemies could truly work together until proven wrong. Boardwing lifted her massive head and spoke aloud, saying the Krell would learn the same lesson the Athelian Empire had learned: fighting humanity was a terrible mistake. Oh, they would also learn that fighting the Alliance was even worse, because it combined human innovation with elven experience. 3 weeks later, the predicted test came. Krell warships attacked a joint colony called New Hope that housed both human and elven families. The attack was savage and clearly designed to break the Alliance by forcing each side to blame the other for poor defenses. It had the opposite effect. Larasa stood on the bridge of her new ship, the Unity, which was built using both human and elven technology. Admiral Morrison commanded the human flagship Resolve. Nearby, the joint fleet moved as one coordinated force toward the Krell attack group. Imberwing flew alongside human starfighters, her rider Kalin coordinating with the human pilots through shared communication systems. The dragons had learned to work with point defense grids instead of against them. When they engaged the Krell, the battle was swift and decisive. Human railguns punched through Krell armor, while elven energy weapons overloaded their shields. Dragons struck with precision, guided by human targeting systems. The Krell commander sent a message demanding to know who dared attack the mighty Krell Empire. Morrison replied calmly that they were the Terran Athelian Alliance, and they protected their people. She said the Krell had one chance to withdraw immediately and pay reparations for the colony attacked. The Krell commander laughed and said they would crush this weak alliance. Stopped laughing when 300 ships appeared on his sensors, both human and elven vessels. Working together in perfect coordination, the Krell fleet fled and never returned to that sector again. After the battle, Irasa and Morrison met in the command center of the Unity. Morrison said the Alliance had passed its first real test. She believed other civilizations were watching and would think carefully before challenging them. Irasa agreed, but added that military strength alone was not enough. They needed to show the galaxy what peaceful cooperation could achieve over the next 2 years. They did exactly that. The Alliance established medical stations that provided free healthcare to any species. Joint research teams made breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel and energy production. They created the Galactic Development Fund, which helped less advanced civilizations improve their technology and quality of life without forcing them to join any empire their species began to notice, and some asked to join the Alliance as equal partners. The Zareen Collective, whose people had once been conquered by the Athelian Empire, sent ambassadors asking for forgiveness and partnership. Lears met with the Zarian delegates personally. She apologized formally for the crimes of the old empire and offered full reparations. The Zarian leader said forgiveness was possible because the elves had clearly changed. She said seeing them work as equals with humans proved that change was genuine. The Zarian Collective became the third member of the Alliance within 5 more years. 8 different civilizations had joined as equal partners. Each brought unique skills and knowledge. The Thrathi were master builders who could construct space stations in weeks. The Thrana had natural abilities in medicine and healing. The Corvin understood mathematics and navigation better than anyone. Together, they created something the galaxy had never seen before. A true alliance based on mutual respect rather than conquest or domination. Liesis now served as the Alliance Council's senior military advisor. She was no longer a conqueror, but a protector. In Barnes spent her time teaching young dragons and their riders about honor and responsibility. The ancient dragon had found new purpose in shaping the next generation. One evening, Larasa and Morrison sat together on a balcony overlooking the Alliance capital city below them. Millions of beings from dozens of species lived and worked together. Morrison said she had been thinking about that first meeting when Lyrasa surrendered. She admitted she had not been sure if the elves would truly change. Larasa smiled and said she understood the doubt. She had not been certain either. The Empire had been built on conquest for so long that changing seemed possible, but Morrison had shown her something important. Mercy was not weakness, and cooperation was stronger than domination. Morrison replied that Larasa had taught her something as well. Military victory was meaningless without a plan for lasting peace. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. Emberwing landed nearby, her scales shimmering in the evening light. The dragon said through their bond that she was proud of what they had built together. Larasa agreed silently, saying she had lived for over 500 years, but these last years had been the most meaningful. Morrison asked what Larasa thought would happen next. Larasa considered carefully and said the alliance would continue to grow eventually. It might encompass most of the galaxy, but there would always be threats from those who preferred conquest to cooperation. The Krell were still dangerous, and there were other aggressive empires in distant sectors, Morrison said. That was fine, because the alliance was ready whatever challenges came. They would face them together. She added that one human war declaration had indeed changed the galaxy forever. But the real change was not the war itself. It was what came after, when former enemies chose to become partners instead of continuing the cycle of violence. Elisa raised her glass in the human tradition of toasting. Morrison did the same. They toasted to peace and cooperation in the future they were building together. Below them the city continued to thrive, a living symbol that different species could not just coexist but flourish together. Inberging spread her great wings and roared her approval. The sound echoed across the city, and young dragons answered from their perches. The age of empires was ending, a new age was beginning, and it would be better than anything that had come before. In the darkness between stars, other civilizations continued to watch. Some with hope and some with fear, but all of them understood one fundamental truth: the galaxy had changed forever, and those who adapted would thrive, while those who clung to the old ways of conquest and domination would be left behind. The alliance stood ready to defend the innocent and welcome those who sought peace, and, if anyone was foolish enough to threaten them, they would learn what humanity had taught the Athalian Empire, that the strongest force in the universe was not weapons or numbers, but beings of different worlds choosing to stand together. That lesson would echo through the galaxy for generations to come, shaping the future in ways beyond imagination. This was the legacy of one human war declaration, and the elf commander who was wise enough to accept defeat and brave enough to embrace change. Together, they had built something eternal.